excitement, patinnery and dancing brave. What a moment of triumph.
What a fantastic performance. Number 2, Dubai Millennium.
Galileo's fighting at him. Fantastic lightning inside. What a race. The race of the world.
And so Grundy has done it. Grundy has established the all-time record for an English trained racehorse. But Leicester's just letting him canter. What a horse this is. He's trotted up.
Rebo fairly romped home. In the straight there was no other horse in it.
Here comes Secretariat to the wire. An unbelievable, an amazing performance.
The race of the decade, Easy Goer against Sunday Silence.
It's a great race home between these two, Rheingold and Roberto.
Hello and welcome to 25 of the greatest ever flat races. A top 25 that was decided by asking various racing personalities, such as commentators, journalists, trainers and breeders, to vote for their top 10 from a list of 50. Then, rather like the Eurovision Song Contest, we added up all the votes, awarding 12 points for a top selection, 10 for a second place selection, 8 for third, and so on. That's how we arrived at our top 25. And later on, we'll reveal which race received the most votes. From that original list of 50, there were some great ones that didn't make the final 25. Crapello and Saraiva's derbies, for example. Dunfermline's famous Oaks victory for Her Majesty the Queen. And I thought El Gran Señor's victory in the 2000 Guineas over Leah Fan and Chief Singer would make it. But no. And another that came desperately close to making the 25 was Pebbles winning the Breeders' Cup Turf in 1985. So what did? Well, at number 25, we crossed the Atlantic for one of the greatest Breeders' Cup head-to-heads. No single event has changed the face of flat racing as much as the Breeders' Cup Series. From its inauguration in 1984, it's consistently provided the most exciting days racing in the international calendar. And every year, its 8 races settle issues of domestic and international superiority. The Breeders' Cup Classic is the highlight of the day. And whilst European runners have performed with credit, the race is nearly always regarded as the definitive decider for that season's North American champion.
$3 million Breeders' Cup Classic, the world's richest race, the race of the decade, Easy Goer against Sunday Silence.
Invariably, the race is given an even keener edge by the rivalry between West and East Coast combatants. And that was certainly the case in 1989. Sunday Silence was the dominant force on the West Coast, just as Easy Goer was in New York. They met in the Kentucky Derby, which Sunday Silence won in the mud. And then he out-duelled Easy Goer in the Preakness. Revenge for Easy Goer came at Belmont when he crushed Sunday Silence's hopes of the Triple Crown. So who was the better? Their encounter in the Breeders' Cup Classic would decide.
Easy Goer is yet to do his best running. He is still 9 lengths off the lead of Slew City Slew. He's 5 lengths behind Sunday Silence, and now he's beginning to roll.
Easy Goer was the favourite and coming off a resounding victory against the older horses in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. Sunday Silence was ridden by Chris McCarron because regular rider Pat Valenzuela was serving a 60-day suspension for testing positive for cocaine. Sunday Silence's trainer Charlie Whittingham told McCarron, "Whatever you do, don't hit him with the whip." In the run for home, that must have been very tempting.
Sunday Silence on the outside, gearing up now. He's left Easy Goer 2.5 lengths behind, and Blushing John is under a hand ride. He leads by 1.5 lengths. Sunday Silence, a threatening presence on the outside. Easy Goer is set down and he's put to a fierce drive. Coming to the final furlong, Sunday Silence surges to the front. Blushing John trying to fight back. Easy Goer with one final acceleration, and Sunday Silence holds on, and he wins by a desperate neck. Easy Goer was too late, not enough to win it, and it was Sunday Silence in a racing epic.
For well over 34 years, the world's greatest flat race, the Epsom Derby, was dominated by one person, Lester Piggott. He had his first ride in 1951, his last in 1985. In that time, he rode 9 Derby winners, starting with Never Say Die in 1954 and finishing with Tinoso in 1983. Vincent O'Brien, responsible for 4 of his Derby winners, always reckoned that around Epsom, Leicester's ability was the equivalent of a 4-pound weight advantage. That advantage proved crucial when he rode the Minstrel in the 1977 Derby. The race voted 24th in our poll. 9-4 favourite for the race was Blushing Groom, a brilliant 2-year-old winner of 4 Group 1 races and prior to the Derby, winner of the French 2000 Guineas. But would this son of Red God get the trip? Mind you, that doubt also applied to the Minstrel, and it was only on Leicester's insistence that the Minstrel was taking part. He had convinced owner Robert Sangster and trainer Vincent O'Brien that the Minstrel wouldn't just stay, he'd win.
Run down into Chattenham Corner. It's $1 Million Man from Hotgrove now in second. Third is Caparello for Baudelaire. The Minstrel coming there strongly in fifth and being chased by Nebbiolo. Blushing Groom is in 8th place. Still going well as they run down into the turn now with just over 3 furlongs to run in the Derby, and it's $1 Million Man being pressed by Hotgrove. The Minstrel coming there in 3rd place. Then comes Be My Guest making progress. Behind them Blushing Groom on the outside unleashing a run. Behind him is Monseigneur. They're coming to the 2 furlong marker. It's Hotgrove from the Minstrel, then Blushing Groom, and Monseigneur still making rapid progress towards the stand side. But it's Hotgrove from the Minstrel and Blushing Groom, then Monseigneur moving into 4th. They're racing into the closing stages now, and it's Hotgrove from the Minstrel, Blushing Groom and Monseigneur. 100 yards to run in the Derby. The Minstrel coming to challenge Hotgrove, and it's Lester Piggott and Willie Carson. The Minstrel on the near side, Hotgrove on the north side, and the Minstrel wins it from Hotgrove. Blushing Groom is 3rd.
Leicester's brutal rat-a-tat finish wouldn't get past the stewards today, but the Minstrel seemed to show no ill effects, going on to win the Irish Derby and the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes. He was syndicated to stand at stud for $9 million. Much of that valuation was due to victory in the Derby. What a difference a neck made, but more importantly, what a difference Piggott made. For number 23, we travel halfway across the world and the race that stops a nation, the Melbourne Cup. Irish trainer Dermot Weld may have trained in the shadow of his most formidable rival, the Ballydoyle stable of Vincent O'Brien, and now his namesake Aidan, but he has proved more adept than those two when it comes to international racing. His Go and Go became the first and to date only European-trained winner of an American Triple Crown race when he won the 1990 Belmont Stakes.
Ready for a start in the 1993 Melbourne Cup. And they're off.
3 years later, and Dermot Weld attempted something even more astonishing, an assault on Australia's Melbourne Cup. These were pioneering days for European runners in Australia's most competitive race, and running in the Southern Hemisphere was far tougher than the East Coast of America.
Frontier Boy raced up to Tiakau Nick. They're in search of the home turn, and 2 lengths further back is the Phantom. Further back in the field is Fra, hard ridden, then Drum Taps under some pressure. Moraka is over on the fence when they sweep into the straight now. Tennessee Jack with a run, and now Pompey out wider. Tiakau Nick turned in front of Frontier Boy, 2 lengths, Moraka's third. Then came Fra, the Phantom down the outside, followed by Vintage Crop coming with a run now, and Tennessee Jack on the outside. Tiakau Nick still in front at the 300, led Frontier Boy a length and a half further back. Vintage Crop, he's coming home, the Irish galloper. Tiakau Nick is in front of Frontier Boy. Vintage Crop is a danger, and Great Vintage is late. Tiakau Nick, but Vintage Crop has got him. Vintage Crop, the Irish horse will win the Melbourne Cup. Vintage Crop, 2 lengths. Tiakau Nick just held second. Mercator flashed up for third.
Dermot Weld, how confident were you going into the race?
I was quietly confident. When the 2 inches of rain came last night, I was concerned. The horse did lose 7 kilos travelling out here, which is considerable, but he put it back on, and on Sunday morning when he worked, I was very pleased with him.
We jump 3 places now because at 20 we have a 3-way tie. 3 very different races they are too. First up, and it's the 1995 Breeders' Cup Classic, featuring the horse who captured the American imagination, Cigar. Cigar was 9 for 9 in 1995 and going for his 11th consecutive Group 1 race when he lined up at Belmont Park. After winning just 1 race in 11 attempts on grass, his career had been transformed by a switch to the dirt. But the track at Belmont was sloppy, a surface he had yet to encounter.
Cigar makes his move, and he sweeps to the lead with a dramatic rush with 3 furlongs to go, and Jerry Bailey turns him loose, and he guides him down to the rail as the field turns for home. Unaccounted for down inside, a quarter of a mile between Cigar and A Perfect Season, coming down to the last furlong with a 2.5 length lead, and Jerry Bailey calls on Cigar for everything he has. The Carrier is a weakening second. On the inside, unaccounted for. On the outside, Solo the Manor. And here he is, the unconquerable, invincible, unbeatable Cigar!
This was jockey Jerry Bailey's 3rd consecutive Classic victory, and the following spring, the pair combined to win the inaugural Dubai World Cup.
They've got a furlong to go. It's a duel to the line. A Solo the Manor the outside of Cigar, and Cigar is digging deep. He's never had to fight harder. He's coming back. It's going to be Cigar. It's going to take it up to the line. Cigar by 3 parts of it. 14 out of 14 for Cigar. A world champion.
By July of that year, Cigar had earned immortality by winning 16 consecutive races to equal the record held by Citation. Cigar returned for the Classic at Woodbine, but finished 3rd and was retired to stud, where, sadly, he proved infertile. Sharing 20th with Cigar is the horse that was boldly renamed to win the race that Cigar did, the Dubai World Cup. In 1998, Sheikh Mohammed had an unraced colt called Yasser that had so convinced him that he could be the best horse Godolphin had ever had that he renamed him Dubai Millennium, in the belief that he would win the world's richest race in the year of the millennium.
They race up with a furlong left to go. It's Dubai Millennium, the odds-on favourite, now careering away. He's opened up again.
A brilliant 3-year-old career that suffered only one reversal when he failed to stay the Derby distance had confirmed Sheikh Mohammed's belief in the brilliance of this magnificent son of Seeking the Gold.
Dubai Millennium wins it by 5 or 6 lengths.
But it certainly didn't put off the Americans from travelling to the Middle East. They supplied 6 of the 13 runners.
I'm not worried because I know he's a good horse. If he won or not, I still know he's a good horse.
Well, Frankie Dettori is really taking a chance here on Dubai Millennium. He's blazing a big trail here. Leads by a length and a half as they race towards the half mile and towards the entrance to the home straight. On the outside, Saints Honour is just behind them. Berens is poking up in the centre. Out wider, Running Stag for Britain in the orange cap is coming into it. But he's going to set a record today if he lasts, I reckon, as they swing into the straight. Dubai Millennium 2 lengths clear as they straighten up for home. Berens struggling in second, followed then by Running Stag. But the cheering has broken out already halfway up the home straight. Dubai Millennium about 4 lengths in front of Berens. Then Running Stag. Further back is Public Purse. Porto Madero coming from last. They've got just over a furlong to go. It's Dubai Millennium who's absolutely pulverised this field. He's 8 lengths in front and going further ahead. Dubai Millennium, a superb performance to win the Dubai World Cup, the world's richest horse race, and a great performance. Dubai Millennium by 8 lengths. Berens second.
It was a quite astonishing performance, and one that thrilled all who were there to see it. Dubai Millennium was the great horse that Sheikh Mohammed had always predicted, and he went on to annihilate Sendawar in the Prince of Wales's stakes before being cruelly cut down twice. First by a career-ending injury as he was being prepared for the Breeders' Cup Classic, and then, after his first season at stud, by a fatal attack of grass sickness. With 4 winners so far, the Dubai World Cup has been one of Godolphin's most successful races. But even more impressive than that is their record in the Irish Champion Stakes. All the victories earned the hard way, and none more so than in 2001.
But it's Galileo who's gone for home, a furlong and a half out. He's kicked 2 or 3 lengths in front.
At the time, Galileo, representing the Coolmore-Ballydoyle partnership, was being talked about as the first potential $100 million horse. In his 6 races so far, he'd never looked like being beaten, and those wins included the Epsom Derby and the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes, where he'd beaten his closest rival, Godolphin's Fantastic Light.
It's Fantastic Light and Galileo locked together. A furlong left to go. Galileo digging deep to
the far side. He's about a head in front. Fantastic Light can't get him. And the 3-year-old's going to win it. Galileo, triumphant in the King George. Fantastic Light on the outside.
Fantastic Light's career was on a totally different trajectory to that of Galileo's. 2 years his senior, he'd been campaigned extensively as far afield as Tokyo, Hong Kong, Dubai and America. He represented everything that Godolphin was about, to campaign a horse fearlessly and go wherever there may be top races.
And Ice Dancer is clear of Give the Slip, being ridden along in second. Fantastic Light is 4 lengths back in third, followed through by Galileo.
Both stables had a pacemaker. Godolphin's, Give the Slip, was under instruction to ignore his Ballydoyle rival and set a sensible pace for their number one. At the critical moment, coming round the turn, Give the Slip moved off the rail to allow Frankie Dettori the inside berth, and so forcing Galileo just that bit wider.
Off the bend, 2 furlongs to race. Ice Dancer coming back to them. Fantastic Light coming there, and on the outside Galileo as they race towards the last furlong and a half in the Irish Champion Stakes. Galileo on the near side, Fantastic Light on the inside. They're head to head as expected. Galileo the near side, Fantastic Light has the rail. Galileo with 150 yards to race. Fantastic Light fighting back on the inside. They're locked together as they go to the line. Galileo and Fantastic Light on the inside. Fantastic Light's won it. Fantastic Light has beaten Galileo with a photo clear of Bach in third.
A great race made even greater because it had been fought out by 2 stables never afraid to take each other on. Common consent afterwards was that Galileo had just lost out to the horse better suited by the 10 furlong distance. The chance of a third encounter looked highly likely with the Breeders' Cup Classic as the nominated target. Surprisingly, at the 11th hour, Fantastic Light was switched from the Classic to the 12 furlong turf race, which he won narrowly. And who did he beat? A fast-finishing Ballydoyle runner in Milan. For many an English-trained thoroughbred, the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe run in October has often been a race too far. French-trained horses habitually take a summer break, whereas the principal English contenders normally run in the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes in late July. Maybe that's why by 1971 no English-trained horse had won the race for 23 years. The great Nijinsky had come desperately close 12 months previously when he lost his unbeaten record in sensational fashion.
And Millreef it is. It's Millreef the favourite coming on inside the last furlong. Linden Tree in
Like Nijinsky, Millreef's season had encompassed the 2,000 guineas, the Derby and the King George. But unlike Nijinsky, he'd been rested after Ascot.
They're off and they're away, and the first to break on the inside is One for All with Sharapur going up there. Then comes Millreef just in.
To win the Arc, Millreef would have to defy history by becoming the first horse to win the Derby, King George and the Arc in the same season. He would also have to overcome the brilliant Alec Head-trained filly, Pistol Packer.
The leader now, and it's Ossian in the lead from Ortiz and Ramsar. Then comes Millreef tucked in just behind him on the inside. Then comes Hallers. Then Miss Dan, who's making good progress. Just in behind them, One for All, the American. Pistol Packer making ground wide towards the outside as they've got 4.5 furlongs to run now in the Arc de Triomphe. And as they race towards the home turn, Ortiz has come there very strongly. Sharapur holding his position. Then comes Ramsar on the inside. Royalty's fighting his way back into the picture. Miss Dan's coming there strongly towards the outside with Pistol Packer also coming there. They've got 3.5 furlongs to run. And it's Sharapur who's hit the front with Hallers. Lester Piggott coming to take it up off him now. And it's Hallers from Millreef who's moved into second. Then comes Pistol Packer towards the outside. And it's Millreef on the far side who struck the front with 2 furlongs to run. Pistol Packer coming to challenge him. Then comes Caro and Hallers. And it's Millreef for England from Pistol Packer from France as they race into the final furlong. It's Millreef from Pistol Packer. Cambrizia is coming there strongly, but it's Millreef holding Pistol Packer. Cambrizia coming there on the line, but at the line, Millreef's the winner. Pistol Packer second.
1971 was a vintage season, kicked off by Brigadier Gerard in the 2,000 guineas and concluded by Millreef in the Arc. It was a victory that earned Millreef Horse of the Year honours, much to the displeasure of followers of the unbeaten Brigadier. Both stayed in training, but sadly a much anticipated rematch was thwarted when Millreef broke a foreleg on the gallops. Against the odds, he was saved for stud duties and became one of the most prolific stallions in the history of the National Stud. It's another tie for our next position, and the winning margin of the 2 races involved amounts to little more than a flared nostril. First, it's the Juddmonte International of 2000. It's a race that's always been one of flat racing's fairest, as York's sweeping turn and long straight offers few opportunities for excuses in running and allows jockeys to ride exactly the race they want. What was particularly inspiring about the 2000 race was that there was virtually nothing to separate the two principals, Giant's Causeway and Calanisi, if they ran to their best form, and that they certainly did.
Giant's Causeway gets past Saki, but can he hold off Calanisi on the outside?
Giant's Causeway and Calanisi had clashed over the same distance at Sandown in the Eclipse, where the Aidan O'Brien trained Giant's Causeway had prevailed by a head.
For George Duffield, they race head-to-head. Giant's Causeway and 53-year-old George Duffield has landed the Coral Eclipse.
At 5-4, many people thought Calanisi represented the value at York. The plan was for the stout-trained runner to challenge wide, so denying Giant's Causeway the close battle he relished.
Mick Cannan can choose to go when he wants, if he can. Giant's Causeway the inside, Calanisi in third under Pat Edry, then Leah Spear, Barathea Guest and Al Mushtarak. They run down to the final 3 furlongs then, and with his stablemate moving obligingly off the fence, Giant's Causeway takes over, but here comes Calanisi with his run down the outside. Giant's Causeway, Calanisi looks very strong out wide, challenging wider out, and that may be a sensible ploy here. Giant's Causeway possibly can't see him, they're not close together, and he battles hard if he can get a target, but it's Calanisi and Giant's Causeway as they run to the final furlong. Giant's Causeway is battling well, Calanisi on the near side, Calanisi's just in front of Giant's Causeway, so they fight again. It's Calanisi and Giant's Causeway at the line. Oh, Giant's Causeway maybe, but it's very close.
Giant's Causeway was a horse who was never going to win his races very easily, but because he was keeping a little bit for himself every time, that enabled him to keep his form so well and bounce on from race to race. But yeah, he was consistent. He was everything you look for in a top-class horse.
You really thought this time Calanisi was going to beat him was all the more remarkable. You're talking about sort of levels of courage and reserve that you rarely see at the top class. Class and courage is a real rarity.
Giant's Causeway by the shortest of margins, and the result may well have been different if Calanisi had not got drawn towards Giant's Causeway in the closing stages. The Iron Horse, as Giant's Causeway was known, just loved a battle and loved racing.
Giant's Causeway digging deep once again on the inside.
He rolled out 18 days later for his 5th consecutive Group 1 win in the Irish Champion Stakes. But his attempt to emulate Milreif's feat of 6 straight Group 1 wins came unstuck at Ascot when John Gosden ensured that his runner, Observatory, did come wide and late to deny the Iron Horse his customary battle. What has so distinguished trainer Aidan O'Brien's career to date is that, like his great rivals Michael Stoute and Saeed bin Suroor, he has the knack of always improving his best horses. In the hands of others, it's most unlikely that Giant's Causeway would have won 5 Group 1 races in just over 11 weeks. And who would have thought, when Rock of Gibraltar narrowly beat Hawkwing in the 2002 Guineas, that that was just the 3rd leg of a record-breaking sequence of 7 Group 1 wins. Yet great as those careers were, they don't quite match up to the star of our next race, High Chaparral.
High Chaparral, the far side, he's staying on the better, he's a length and a half in front. Hawkwing is...
High Chaparral won Group 1 races at 2, 3 and 4. He won them at distances from a mile to a mile and a half. He won on the soft, he won on the firm. But that's only part of the story. Many thought that he was just an out-and-out slugger. A credible opinion if he'd been retired at 3, but High Chaparral returned as a 4-year-old to show us what his trainer always knew, that he had afterburners for acceleration and, above all, a will to win matched only by the very best. Those qualities were evident in his first serious test of the season, and what a test it was too. The Irish Champion Stakes against Falbrav, the Japan Cup winner and holder of the Coral Eclipse and Juddmonte International crowns. But great field and great finish that it was, it isn't the race voted 17th in our poll. For that, we crossed the Atlantic for the Breeders' Cup Turf, run in the cauldron of the Santa Anita heat, a venue and climate where so many European hopes have disappeared with the California sunset. Falbrav's connections reckon that although he was stepping up in distance by running in the turf, all the odds were in his favour to avenge that Leopardstown defeat. Firm ground and a tight track would make this much more like a European 10-furlong race. And this time, Daryl Holland would make sure that when Falbrav was primed to go, he would have somewhere to go. Since Ireland, High Chaparral had disappointed in the Arc, coming third. This, with the heat and the long distance travelled, was surely a race too many.
As the pace begins to quicken for the run down the backstretch, Falbrav still on hold, running along in fourth, storming home. Gary Stevens fifth on the outside.
The characteristic of a High Chaparral race was that moment, some way from home, when he would have to respond to Mick Kinnan's vigorous riding to maintain his position. Very few horses do that time and time again, and he didn't disappoint in the Breeders' Cup Turf when he had to react to a move made by Falbrav and Daryl Holland.
Chaparral is called on for his run as Balthasar retreats, storming home, and Gary Stevens.
Falbrav got first run on him in America, probably on the fastest 1.5 miles in the world. Not a very fast race, and he was still able to pick him up and beat him on the line. So it just goes to show the ability the horse had. He really put his head down and quickened.
Yeah, I had to get him rolling halfway around the bend. I gave him probably 2 backhanders with my left and then pulled him out and got him switch and pulled it into my right. And then from then on, you know, he had to dig in deep and really fire up to get home. And then he answered every call. It was a great response by the colt.
High Chaparral and Joe Haar couldn't be separated at the finish, and yet again the Irish raider had shown that tremendous will to win.
I was only aware of the last few strides that the other fella arriving. If he had arrived maybe a stride or two earlier, it might have helped us. My horse was only reacting at the winning post, getting, you know, from the other horse. My fellow really dug in deep and wanted to win badly.
He was in front before the line, just up sides on the line, and in front after the line, and the nod just went, his nod was at the wrong time. His head was up when the other horse's head was down. Really, he did very well to win after Falbrav getting first run off the bend on him, you know, so we were delighted really.
It's a dead heat, the first in Breeders' Cup history.
The last horse to win the American Triple Crown was affirmed back in 1978, and he's the subject of our next race, the Jockey Club Gold Cup, run at Belmont Park, over 1.5 miles. What so distinguished this race was that it featured 2 Triple Crown winners, Affirmed and Seattle Slew.
Seattle Slew has 4 lengths on Run Dusty Run.
Seattle Slew's path to Triple Crown glory was relatively straightforward, and of the 10 horses to win the Triple Crown, he's the only one to do so as an unbeaten horse.
Onto the wire, and it's all over with. John Cougar looks back. He's got it when he stands up. It's over with. Seattle Slew 3.5.
Affirmed won the Triple Crown the hard way and at the expense of his great rival Alydar. Their duel at Belmont was one of the great Triple Crown clashes.
Affirmed and Alydar heads apart. Affirmed's got a nose in front as they come onto the wire. At the finish, it's going to be dead tight. Affirmed won it.
A month prior to Seattle Slew and Affirmed's meeting in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, they met in the Marlborough Cup over the shorter distance of 1.5 miles.
Still Seattle Slew's holding on. Nearing the finish, Seattle Slew has it by 4. Affirmed, fireback, nasty and bold.
The margin of victory was 3 lengths, but would Seattle Slew prevail over the extra 3 furlongs of the Jockey Club Gold Cup? At the start of the season, he'd been running and winning over 7 furlongs. The 2 principals set the pace down the back stretch, and then, as Seattle Slew took up the running, Affirmed's saddle slipped, and his rival took what seemed to be a crucial advantage.
They come for the head of a stretch. Slew still 2.5. Here comes Exceller to the inside. Shoemaker makes his move at Seattle Slew. It is Seattle Slew, Exceller along the inside. Those 2 heads apart, but it's Exceller who has a head in front at the head of a stretch.
They went 1.25 miles in 2:01.4, and they're battling it out. Still Slew hanging in there. Exceller has the inside. It's Exceller along the inside. Seattle Slew on the outside. This is a real battle onto the wire, but Exceller gets a narrow lead as they pass the 16th pole. Seattle Slew coming back again.
Seattle Slew lost little in defeat. He was the sort of horse that dreams are made of. A group of friends had got together to put up the $17,500 that he cost as a yearling, and then saw him become a Triple Crown winner and one of the leading sires of the latter part of the 20th century. One of the reasons why Lester Piggott rode 9 Derby winners was that he could tell just by studying a horse's conformation whether it would act around Epsom. It's all to do with balance, the key ingredient for success in the Derby. In 1972, one horse in particular had the qualities necessary for Epsom, Roberto. Trained in Ireland by Vincent O'Brien, Roberto had been a top-class 2-year-old, and he'd advertised his Epsom claims by finishing second to High Top in the 2000 Guineas. There was only one problem for Lester. Roberto was to be ridden by the Australian jockey Bill Williamson, or Weary Willie as he was known, and Lester was consigned to find an outsider to ride. Then 10 days before the race, Williamson injured a shoulder in a fall at Epsom, and although past fit to ride 2 days before the Derby, Roberto's owner, John Galbraith, replaced him with Piggott. Opinion was divided between those expressing sympathy for the 49-year-old Williamson and those who recognised the owner's right to put up any jockey he wished on his horse. But when Lester cantered to post, there were as many boos as cheers. That soon changed as the field headed for Tattenham Corner and what was to be the most exciting race in the history of the Derby.
It's Pentland Firth in the lead from Meadow Mint. Then comes Mercia Boy and Palladium towards the outside with Manny Tooling and Ormindo on the inner. Then Paper Boy, then Roberto. Behind Roberto is Charlie with Yaroslav making good ground. And Leafar, one of the back markers, and making a wide swing into Tattenham Corner. A very wide swing indeed. It's Pentland Firth with 3 furlongs to run, and Leafar's run almost off the course. Right over to the very far side and dropped back to Stone Last. Coming up to the 2.5 furlong point now, and it's Pentland Firth clear in the Derby from Meadow Mint, then Ormindo, then making very good progress is Roberto with Rheingold at the 2 furlong marker, and it's Pentland Firth being challenged by Lester Piggott on Roberto. Then comes Rheingold, then Meadow Mint, behind them Ormindo, coming up towards the furlong marker now, and it's Rheingold who's hit the front from Roberto. It's Rheingold from Roberto and Pentland Firth. Rheingold on the near side, Roberto on the far side. It's a great race home between these two, Rheingold and Roberto. Roberto inching his way back as they come to the line. It's a photo finish, Roberto and Rheingold.
All who were at Epsom that day acknowledged that no other jockey could have done what Lester had done. He was the difference between victory and defeat. John Galbraith had promised Weary Willie the same winning percentage as Lester, but it was scant consolation, and he maintained his bitterness towards those who had deposed him until the day he died from cancer a few years later. The severe race at Epsom left its mark on Roberto, and he disappointed next time out in the Irish Derby, but he came back to record his finest victory when inflicting the only defeat in Brigadier Gerard's career at York in the Juddmonte. Lester Piggott's exploits on horses such as Roberto made him a household name and made him a celebrity beyond horse racing. He's one of the icons of 20th century sport, but even his fame has been eclipsed in recent years by another jockey. He is, of course, Frankie Dettori, and in 14th place we have the race that put Frankie on the superstar map. The Ascot Festival of Racing in September is one of the highlights of the racing season, with the third race on the card, the Queen Elizabeth II Stakes, the centrepiece of the day. By then, Frankie had ridden a double, and his mount, the 2000 Guineas winner Mark of Esteem, soon made that a treble when he sprinted past the fillies Guineas winner Bos Rasham.
Mark of Esteem sprints, and Mark of Esteem on Frankie Dettori. He completes a fantastic treble. Frankie Mark of Esteem has won it from Bos Rasham.
Races 4, 5 and 6 came and went, all falling to Frankie, and the unbelievable was now a distinct possibility. Fujiyama Crest, the 7th of Frankie's rides, had won the corresponding race the previous year. Trained by Michael Stout, he was back down to 2-1 favourite, as bookmakers tried to lay off liabilities that had accrued from multiple bets placed on Frankie's mounts.
2 miles to go this time. Frankie Dettori bidding for a 7-timer from 7 rides. Fujiyama Crest just the leader from Meant to Be. A roar goes up from the crowd.
There was every chance the favourite would get turned over. He liked to bowl along in front, and with top weight of 9 stone 10 pounds, that's never easy.
Just under half a mile to race, and still Fujiyama Crest, and a roar goes up from the crowd as Frankie's going to lead them into the straight with 3 furlongs to race. Fujiyama Crest by 2 lengths from Northern Fleet, then Upper Gallery and Meant to Be, and then comes Durham towards the outside. 2 furlongs out, Fujiyama Crest, another roar from the crowd. Frankie Dettori's out in front. Northern Fleet is in pursuit. Durham coming on the outside. Then Pearl Venture, but it's still Fujiyama Crest. Fujiyama Crest and Frankie Dettori going for the 7-timer. Northern Fleet and Pat Edry in 2nd place. Running on in 3rd is Embryonic, Fujiyama Crest and Northern Fleet. It's a desperate finish as they run up to the line. Fujiyama Crest finding a bit more, and it's 7 for Frankie. Fujiyama Crest holds on for Northern Fleet, then Miraswaki and Ivers Flutter.
This was the first time ever a jockey had won all 7 races on the card, and although the horses were integral to the extraordinary achievement, it was Frankie who had made it happen. All his skills, strength, timing, balance, judgment of pace were on display that afternoon at Ascot. This was Frankie at his very best, and racing was fortunate that he had the personality to cash in on such an achievement. It took the sport to a completely new audience. The only losers that day were the bookies, swamped by the accumulative odds of 25,091 to 1. As for Fujiyama Crest, he now enjoys a very special retirement.
After he won Ascot, he went jumping, and he wasn't a particularly very good jumper. It was at the sale, the lad what used to look after him, he rang me, and he said, look, Fuji's at the sales, why? He said, look, you know, we both love the horse, why don't you go and try to buy him? So I rang Mr. Curtis and I bought him privately, and it is, and he looks $1 million, and now he's got a home for life.
At 13, we have the race that was the coronation for one of the great racehorses of the 20th century. The 1956 Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe, won by Rebo. Italian-bred by the great Tessio Incisa della Rocchetta partnership, and mostly Italian raced, Rebo was never beaten in 16 races. His 3 races outside of Italy were 2 Arcs and the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes. He won the first of his Arcs by 3 lengths and the King George by 5. On his return to Longchamp, he faced a field far stronger than the previous year, including 2 runners from America. Now, in those days, it was quite common for Europe's premier all-age race to attract cross-Atlantic travellers.
Rebo, of course, was hot favourite. He won the race last year. Indeed, he'd won all his 15 races. And so it was on this occasion too. In the straight, there was no other horse in it. Rebo fairly romped home to bring his total winnings well over the £100,000 mark. It was his last race, but now he goes to stud, valued at something like £500,000.
That was one of the finest performances in the history of the Arc, and Rebo went on to be just as effective and influential at stud. A 5-year lease to America became a permanent one when he became increasingly intractable and no insurance company was prepared to risk covering his return journey. His progeny, though, made their mark on both sides of the Atlantic, and his influence was a fitting tribute to the skill of the breeder Federico Tessio, who single-handedly put Italian racing on the international map.
There won't be a finish that gives so much pleasure to so many people. And this is just a truly wonderful horse.
Horses who can sell out a racecourse are much more common over jumps than on the flat. But our race at number 12 features the horse that in recent years has been the most popular of both codes, Persian Punch. Over 9 racing seasons, Persian Punch earned the most money by a British-trained gelding, and his 13 pattern wins equalled the European record.
Persian Punch, can he pull it out of the fire again? He's fighting back, he's coming back at Jardy's lookout.
But it wasn't records and statistics that made Persian Punch so popular. Quite the opposite, as he owed much of his popularity to the fact that he was quite an ordinary horse, losing more races than he won. It was his resolution and his courage that so endeared him to the public. He just never knew when he was beaten. That was never better demonstrated than in the race voted number 12, the 2003 Jockey Club Cup.
Persian Punch quite sternly driven again. Savannah Bay out wide, and then Porser System now under pressure, and Tholjana still travels well as well. Well, Persian Punch is going to have to really dig deep here because the others are going very well at this stage, but stamina is the leader's forte as they run towards the final 3 furlongs, and we know that he will keep going. It's Persian Punch by a length to Castari. Millenary is just cantering, pootling along over on the far side, but will he get the trip? Savannah Bay, Castari hangs left, Persian Punch in the centre, Millenary challenging on the far side. Then in behind them, Tholjana's still got a chance, followed by Savannah Bay and Porser System. They run down into the dip. Millenary is taking it up now. Tholjana looks the danger. Persian Punch battling on, and Castari out wide, almost 4 in a line, all 4 under maximum pressure, and Persian Punch is rallying very gamely on the near side of Millenary. Tholjana between them. Persian Punch, he's got his nose in front for Millenary. It's going to be tight. Oh, that's close.
He'd put up some tremendously brave performances. You know, he used to get headed and fight back, and I think that was the best of his performances, and he got the whipped across the nose by, I think, Pat Eddery riding Millenary. I mean, he was beaten everywhere but got back on the line, and it was one of the most memorable flat races I've ever seen.
From a seemingly irretrievable position of 4th with 100 yards to go, Persian Punch had found more, and as soon as the magic words number 2 were announced as the winner, the 20,000 mass of racegoers erupted as one. Such scenes seem bittersweet now, as Persian Punch, returning for his seasonal debut as an 11-year-old, collapsed and died of a ruptured artery at Ascot. His loss would leave a gaping hole. Perhaps it's appropriate that following the heroics of Persian Punch, the winner of the race voted number 11 shares much of that fighting spirit. Seabiscuit could also rouse a racing public to mass hysteria. Seabiscuit's story is such a great rags-to-riches tale that it's remarkable Hollywood waited so long before committing it to celluloid. Unwinnable and barely trainable, Seabiscuit was transformed by a combination of owner Charles Howard, trainer Tom Smith and jockey Red Pollard, and became a national icon who in 1938 received more press coverage than any other news figure at the time. He was foaled on the wrong side of the track, and it took him 18 minor races to get off the mark. It was his rivalry with the East Coast blue-blooded Triple Crown winner War Admiral that really fired the public's imagination. A number of abortive attempts were made to match race the pair, and eventually it happened at Pimlico over 9.5 furlongs in the autumn of 1938.
This week we record the epic duel between War Admiral number 1 and Seabiscuit. It's a feud of long standing, and there are 40,000 out to see the result. Seabiscuit jumps into the lead with over a mile to go. With the aid of the slow motion camera, you can see the action of the rivals in America's turf race of the century. Both horses are the progeny of the famous Man of War. Seabiscuit a grandson, War Admiral a son. War Admiral, making his bid, catches Seabiscuit, and they race neck and neck. In the straight, Seabiscuit, 2 years older than the Admiral, recovers his lead and races on to win in record time for the distance.
Red Pollard, Seabiscuit's regular jockey, had missed the ride through injury, and the common view from the East Coast was that his deputy, George Iceman Wolfe, had won a battle of tactics. The clock told a different story. Seabiscuit, who'd made every yard of the running, had set a new track record. So into the top 10, and we're now in the domain of great champions. The winner of our next race would waltz into the top 5 of any poll of greatest horses of the 20th century, and quite likely to top the bill. It's Seabird and his breathtaking victory in the 1965 Derby. Trained in France by the great Etienne Paulet, Seabird went to Epsom as a short-priced favourite, following a 6-length thrashing of Diatome in the Prix Lupin. His 2-length margin of victory at Epsom barely tells the story of the race, for he never came off the bit and only needed to be roused in the final furlong to keep his mind on the job.
But it's still Sanacelli from Bam Royal. I'd say on the inside, Meadow Court and Nixar. Then Gulf Pearl is right up there just behind him with Vlerten, then Seabird. Behind Seabird is Ballymaray, and then comes Creosote. And beginning the descent now, and this is a point where positioning is essential, and it's Sanacelli, the white leg Sanacelli, is still the leader from Nixar going up on his outside. Then comes Bam Royal. Then I say Meadow Court is still well in touch, just in behind the leaders, and Gulf Pearl is coming there with a good run. Then comes Seabird, the favourite, just in behind him, and Vlerten's also there. Coming down the hill into Tattenham Corner now, and Sanacelli is still the leader from Nixar in second place. Then comes Gulf Pearl third. Then I say on the rails, then Meadow Court. And then comes Centaur making grounds on the stand side, and then the favourite Seabird coming up to the 2.5 marker now, and it's I say on the far side from Sanacelli and Nixar, and then comes Gulf Pearl and unleashing his run, Seabird towards the stand side now, and it's I say the leader from Nixar and Gulf Pearl, and Seabird towards the stand side coming up to the furlong marker, and I say is the leader from Seabird on the stand side. It's Seabird now coming away from I say, and as they race up towards the line, it's Seabird going away from I say. Meadow Court is in third place. Seabird going away, and it looks as though barring accidents he's going to win the Derby easily. Seabird going away from Meadow Court in second place, and I say third, and at the line Seabird the winner.
It would be easy to decry the value of the race because of the ease with which it was won. Seabird made them look like selling platers, and that included the runner-up Meadow Court, who went on to defeat the older horses in the King George. And this wasn't even Seabird's best performance, but more of that later. Just as Seabird's Derby was a one-horse race, so is the race at number 9, the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes, won by Nijinsky. 1970 was the year of Nijinsky, the last colt to win the English Triple Crown. He was one of the first of Vincent O'Brien's many famous American imports, and had he not been trained by one so skilled as Vincent, it's most unlikely that he would have ever fulfilled his potential. Nijinsky was a handful, and in his early days at Ballydoyle appeared to resent being trained, but careful handling by trainer and work riders was rewarded by a brilliant undefeated 2-year-old who spent the winter as the hot favourite for the 2,000 guineas. The first classic of the season and the Derby were won with breathtaking authority.
But no danger whatever to the favourite, just having to be shaken up. Nijinsky from Yellow God, Amberama, Roi Soleil running on, might be third at the post. Nijinsky's the winner.
And here comes Lester Piggott on Nijinsky. It's Shear on the far side, Lester Piggott on the near side on Nijinsky. Nijinsky coming to take it up from Shear and racing up towards the line. It's a fist for Lester Piggott. Nijinsky's gone clear. Nijinsky's the winner. Shear is...
The Irish Derby soon followed, and by the time Nijinsky returned to England for Ascot's showpiece, it was his 5th race in 16 weeks, and on paper, his toughest assignment. He was the only 3-year-old in a field containing the winners of 2 derbies, a French Oaks, a Washington DC International and a Coronation Cup.
And then Lester Piggott taking closer order on Nijinsky, and finally Crepolana, and they're swinging around the home straight now with Caliban being pressed by Calabas. Hogarth in between these two. Nijinsky's just in behind Calabas. Blakeney's over on the far rails. Crepolana's beginning a run, and it's Caliban over on the far side being pressed by Calabas, and here comes Nijinsky and Lester Piggott towards the stand side with Hogarth making ground over on the far side now. They're coming into the final furlong, and it's Nijinsky striding away from them. Nijinsky going away, being chased by Blakeney now. It's the 2 Derby winners who look like being first and second. Lester Piggott looks over his shoulder. Blakeney's making ground on him, but Lester's just letting him canter. What a horse this is. He's trotted up. Nijinsky's the winner. Blakeney's second.
This was Nijinsky at his majestic best, and the last time we'd see such arrogance. A virulent form of ringworm interrupted his preparation for the St Leger and left him exposed for the Arc, where Lester Piggott, perhaps fooled by the ease of victory in the King George, rode him over confidently. The short-head defeat by Sassafras denied Nijinsky the title of the greatest of them all. He was known as Big Red, and in 1973 he produced a performance the like of which was hard to believe. Secretariat, the awesome son of Bold Ruler, won a Triple Crown race by a massive 31 lengths, and for good measure he set a new world record for a dirt race. Secretariat had started his Triple Crown year with an almost unprecedented reputation. He was the first 2-year-old to earn Horse of the Year honours, and prior to his 3-year-old season had been syndicated for a then world record $6.08 million. A surprise defeat in his prep race for the Kentucky Derby, the Wood Memorial, was just a temporary setback, and he came from last to first at Churchill Downs and then did the same in the Preakness. These were the first Triple Crown races to be won by a son of Bold Ruler. His sons are noted for their speed, so some doubted Secretariat's effectiveness over the extra distance of the Belmont. What he did was quite extraordinary.
Sham on the outside. Sham getting ahead in front as they move around the turn with Secretariat second. Then there's a large gap. Make it 8 lengths back to My Gallant in third and Twice a Prince fourth. And Private Smiles is still a trailer. They're on the backstretch. It's almost a match race now. Secretariat's on the inside, by ahead. Sham is on the outside. They've opened 10 lengths on My Gallant, who is third by ahead, with Twice a Prince fourth. Then it's another 8 lengths back to Private Smiles, who is trailing the field. They continue down the backstretch, and that Secretariat now taking the lead. He's got it by about 1.5 lengths. Still Sham, 10 lengths back. My Gallant, Twice a Prince. They're moving on the turn now. For the turn at Secretariat, it looks like he's opening. The lead is increasing. Make it 3.5. He's moving into the turn. Secretariat holding on to a large lead. Sham is second, and then it's a long way back to My Gallant and Twice a Prince. They're on the turn. Its Secretariat is blazing along. The first 3/4 of a mile in 1:09 4/5. Secretariat is widening now. He is moving like a tremendous machine. Secretariat by 12. Secretariat by 14 lengths on the turn. Sham is dropping back. It looks like they'll catch him today, as My Gallant and Twice a Prince are both coming up to him now. But Secretariat is all alone. He's out there almost a 1/16 of a mile away from the rest of the horses. Secretariat is in a position that seems impossible to catch. He's into the stretch. Secretariat leads his field by 18 lengths. And now Twice a Prince has taken second, and My Gallant has moved back to third. They're in the stretch. Secretariat has opened a 22-length lead. He is going to be the Triple Crown winner. Here comes Secretariat to the wire. An unbelievable, an amazing performance. He hits the finish 25 lengths in front.
Sham, who had defeated Secretariat in the Wood Memorial, had now finished runner-up to Big Red in all 3 Triple Crown races. This was an unbelievable performance, impossible for Big Red to maintain, and subsequently he was beaten at odds of 10-1 on at Saratoga. He never quite did it in the breeding shed, but on the track he was the true king. It's very rare in flat racing that the star 2-year-olds of one year all turn up the next for the first big race of the season, the 2000 Guineas. Training setbacks or a failure to train on normally account for most. But in 1971, the 3 stars of the previous year all lined up at Newmarket. And what a triumvirate they were. Brigadier Gerard, Mill Reef and My Swallow.
My Swallow just walking round towards the rear, ridden by Frankie Doe, who's in great form.
My Swallow, the champion 2-year-old of France and England, was undefeated, as was Brigadier Gerard, who had won 4 from 4 at 2. Mill Reef's only defeat had been when beaten a short head in the Prix Robert Papin by My Swallow. The Brigadier didn't run prior to the Guineas, whereas Mill Reef and My Swallow both won their prep races. And that was why many saw the race as a match between those two.
I remember the build-up to Newmarket that year was really quite phenomenal, because we all knew there was something special, and just getting them together on one day, on one race course, made it an amazing occasion. And it's one of those things that lives with you forever.
My Swallow and Mill Reef almost together, and both of them well on the bridle. Minsky in third place, Brigadier Gerard moving up to dispute third place, and now the race is really on as they come up the hill towards the bushes. Just under 3 furlongs to go now. My Swallow and Mill Reef almost together. Lester Pickett on Minsky right there, poised. If he's good enough, he's there. He's placed the challenge. Brigadier Gerard on the right of the 4, and these 4 coming right away as one rather expected they would. And now the whips are up as they run down into the dip, and it's Brigadier Gerard on this this side, Millreef in the centre, My Swallow on the far side, Minsky in fourth place, and Brigadier Gerard is in front as they come up the hill with 150 yards to go. It's Brigadier Gerard on this side who is well in front. There's nothing between Millreef and My Swallow. Millreef is going to be second, but Brigadier Gerard has won it at the breast. Brigadier Gerard is the winner. Millreef second, My Swallow third.
The thing that I remember most is when they went into the dip and Joe Mercer gave Brigadier Gerard his head. He just really went sprinting clear, and it was one of those great moments.
Immediate reaction after the race was that Millreef and My Swallow had run as if in a match and cut each other's throats, but Brigadier Gerard proved himself to be a more than exceptional miler and remained undefeated until his very last race. My Swallow never recaptured his 2-year-old brilliance and ran just twice more, whereas Millreef, like the Brigadier, became a giant of the turf, winning that rare treble of Derby, King George and Arc as a 3-year-old, something that had eluded Nijinsky just a year previously. What a golden period it was for racing. There's no 6th place because at number 5 we have a tie, and perhaps it's fitting that they should be tied because both races were on the dirt in America and both took place on that day of champions, the Breeders' Cup. In 1991, the 8th Breeders' Cup was still very much uncharted territory for European runners. The most successful visitors were the French, and they'd won 5 Breeders' Cup races compared to a solitary success for British and Irish trainers. All 7 successes had come on the turf. So when Francois Boutin sent France's very best 2-year-old to contest the juvenile colts race, it seemed more likely to end in ignominious failure rather than glorious success. The race was on the dirt, around 2 turns, the first of which was almost immediately after the start, and the European entrant also got the very worst of the draw, 14 out of 14. It would be a remarkable achievement just to get Europe's first ever Breeders' Cup place in a dirt race. But then Arazi was a remarkable horse.
The horse was absolutely outstanding, but you just don't see that kind of thing happening. I mean, I certainly can't recall having seen anything comparable to that. I mean, he was so far back early on, going into the Breeders' Cup, had never been around a left-hand bend before, just got completely sort of outpaced and well behind, and you thought, here you are, another European tailed off in a dirt race at the Breeders' Cup.
And Arazi, the European star, is a dozen lengths from the front as Offbeat trails the field as they continue midway down the backstretch. Bertrando coasting on an uncontested lead, and he's moving at a quick pace, the quarter in 23-1. He gets a half in 46 3/5 seconds. It is.
So when he started making his move down the backstretch and weaving in and out of horses, you still felt when they reached the top turn that effort was going to tire him, and then when he swung round into the straight and came up to Bertrando, I don't think the jockey on Bertrando could really believe his eyes.
Arazi hits his best stride, and there goes the European star Arazi, and he's coming with a menacing rush to Bertrando, and now the stage is set as they move toward the top of the stretch, and Arazi runs right by him. Arazi with a dramatic move as the field turns for home. He's wide into the stretch. Bertrando stunned at the inside with the move here of Arazi, and he's pouring it on. Just incredible move as they come to the top of the stretch by 4 now. And then it's Bertrando, who is now a discouraged second farther back. It is Snappy Landing, and they're coming down to the finish here. Here indeed is a superstar. Arazi, absolutely brilliant. He was taken under a hard hold to win it here by 5, and he could have won by 10 perhaps.
When you talk about the best race or the most exciting race, or however you want to judge it, it has to be a race which, when you see it again years later, still arouses in you the emotion and the sentiment which you felt the first time you saw it. And that's the one race for me which stands out above all the others, because when you see it again, even though you know what's going to happen, you still can't believe from how far back he is that he's got any chance of winning, and it's still almost unbelievable to see it sort of now, 13, 14 years later, and actually believe that he could win from where he was, and that's why for me it stands out.
Arazi's reputation was dulled by subsequent performances, notably when he tried to relive the memory in the Kentucky Derby. But on this day, he gave us the most extraordinary performance of all in a Breeders' Cup race.
What a race, and what a horse, the best in the world, the biggest winning margin in the history of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he did it with ease.
Absolutely
absolutely sensational.
Considering that it's sometimes perceived as sterile and metronomic, American racing in the shape of the Breeders' Cup has produced some of the great stories of the last 20 years. The greatest of them all, certainly for the Europeans, happened in 1990, and it had very little to do with the horse and everything to do with the man who rode him, 55-year-old Lester Piggott, who'd returned to the saddle just weeks previously after a 5-year break.
I mean, it was quite an amazing story because Royal Academy was a sprinter. He'd won the July Cup, and here he was attempting to run a mile, you know, a 2-turn mile, and his jockey was injured a couple of weeks before, and John Reid was stable jockey to Vincent O'Brien at the time, and they were searching around for a jockey. And I remember having a chat to John Bankner one day, and I said, well, you know, Lester's come out of retirement, and bear in mind Lester had not only come out of retirement but come out of jail, and you know, I said he's still riding as good as anybody. And in a race where the Americans always go very fast, somebody with the bottle to hold a horse up, especially with that had the speed of Royal Academy, I said, what about Lester? And he just rode the perfect hold-up race.
The quarter went in a sharp 22 and 3/5 seconds as the field enters the far turn. A grueling half mile here of 45 4. And it's expensive decision now. Who shakes loose from Shotgun Scott? Go Dutch. It's All Greek to Me is now coming with his sharp rally on the outside. Steinlen has now faded to 5th. On the outside, Mark of Distinction is clear running now, and here comes Mark of Distinction with his run for the lead. Lady Winner is in behind a phalanx of horses with nowhere to go. Royal Academy and Lester Piggott are 6 lengths off the lead, but they're launching their rally now as they come down to the final furlong. It's All Greek to Me has a short lead. Expensive decision battling back. Mark of Distinction. Royal Academy is thundering down the center of the turf course, and Steinlen is 5th. They're coming down to the finish. Lester Piggott flailing away at Royal Academy. It's All Greek to Me toward the inside. Here's the wire. Head bobbing finish. Royal Academy does it, and the living legend out of retirement, 54-year-old Lester Piggott, pulls off the upset here.
Royal Academy wasn't the greatest of racehorses. You wouldn't remember him as one of the great milers of all time. But that one day that Lester Piggott came back, showed the Americans, it was marvellous that on the Breeders' Cup Roll of Honour, Lester Piggott's name is there because of Royal Academy. Absolutely unforgettable. Old Grandad back, stuffed the Americans.
After the disappointment of Dejour jumping the shadow at the moment of victory in the sprint, Lester's extraordinary swan song was the perfect antidote. It's often said that the physical demands on sportsmen are greatest on jockeys because of the deprivations. So for Lester to produce such a strong finish at the age of 55 just makes you realise what a phenomenon he was.
Head bobbing finish. Royal Academy does it, and the living legend out of retirement, 54-year-old Lester Piggott, pulls off the upset here.
Moving ever closer to that #1 spot, and now for perhaps the most famous horse of them all, who blitzed his field in the greatest race of them all. At number 4, it's Shergar and his Derby of 1981. Now, it's very tempting to add lustre to Shergar's performances because of his tragic kidnapping during his first season at stud, and because of those events, his race of all the races in our top 25 is the most seen, repeated on television almost whenever his name is mentioned.
Rigoretto, the leader, from Silver Season in second. Shergar spotted his white face there in third, the grey.
And it's a race that can be watched time and time again, for this is poetry in motion. And poetry in motion around a track designed to upset even the smoothest of actions. To watch Shergar's fluent gallop is to see what the beauty of the thoroughbred is all about.
There on the left of the picture, up on the outside, then Scintillating Air just in behind them. And behind Scintillating Air is Church Parade, then comes Shotgun, then comes King's Jeddah in the field, well and truly strung out as they swing into the home straight, that's having round Chatham corner, and the white face of Shergar moves up to dispute the lead with Rigoretto. Shergar, Rigoretto from Silver Season and Scintillating Air, then behind these comes Shotgun and Walter Swinburne is committed, he's going for home, and Shergar is going on and going clear. The odds-on favourite clear in the Derby with just over 2 furlongs left to go. It's Shergar in the lead and clear from Silver Season. Lester Piggott coming very wide on shotgun, but they've got 2 furlongs left to race, under 2 furlongs to go, and it's Shergar in the lead. Shergar from Scintillating Air in second place. Church Parade is third, Shotgun 4, then comes Glint of Gold, but Shergar is well clear with a furlong to go. Shergar a long way clear of his rivals. Shergar in the lead and clear. Warner Swinburne riding him out, going for home ahead of Glint of Gold is second, Scintillating Air is third, Shotgun is 4, but coming up to the line, Shergar is going to win it at the line. Shergar is the winner, very easy winner. Glint of Gold second.
When I saw him winning, I was smitten by the sport. Came home from school, 1981, and saw this wonderful specimen of a thoroughbred blitzing the field under Walter Swinburne in famous colours, and I thought, what a great sport, and I've loved it ever since. And then of course he went on and absolutely galloped his rivals into abstract submission at the Curragh. He was a tremendous horse, and he was my real first introduction to the great sport of flat racing.
10 lengths was the official margin, the greatest ever recorded in the race. And it would have been greater had Walter Swinburne not eased down once he realised how staggeringly far ahead he was.
I suppose many people sort of will remember Shergar for what happened after his racing career and films and books and the kidnapping, etc., etc. But I think the day he won the Derby at Epsom by 10 lengths was an astonishing performance. That was a really brilliant performance on the day, and one that will live long in the memory.
Shergar reproduced that beautiful flowing action in the Irish Derby and the King George before becoming unstuck in the St Leger. His early death was a tragedy for all those associated with him and for the breed. To be denied the offspring of such an animal is a tremendous shame. Just 1 vote separates third from fourth in our list, and in third place is the only horse to have won 2 races in our top 25. It's Seabird and his finale in the 1965 Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. What distinguished this performance from his win in the Derby was the quality of the field. 20 runners lined up, and 5 of them were Derby winners, including Tom Rolfe, who'd won the American Derby, and Anilin, winner of the Russian equivalent. It's no exaggeration to say that this field contained the very finest middle-distance stayers in the world.
You had Reliance in the field. He was unbeaten. He'd won the Prix du Jockey Club and the Grand Prix, and a lot of people thought he was going to turn over Seabird. And Diatome was third, and he went on and won the Washington International after that, absolutely franking the form. There's probably never been a better field for any top-class race in Europe, and he absolutely slaughtered them. It was just a fantastic performance.
Tom Rolfe is right up there with the leaders for America. Marco Visconti still making it. Marco Visconti, the leader from Anilin, the Russian horse, coming to try and challenge and get up on his inside. Then Emerald. Then comes Tom Rolfe in 4th place on the outside. Just behind Tom Rolfe is Reliance, who's still on the rails and still going handily. Seabird is somewhere behind them. Coming down the hill now, and Marco Visconti on the inside has kept his inside berth. Anilin, the Russian, challenging him on the outside. Emerald is in 3rd place. Tom Rolfe is 4th. They're running down the hill now to the home turn, and as they do so, Tom Rolfe making a lot of progress towards the outside. Marco Visconti hanging on, Anilin still in his position. Reliance just in behind the leaders. Coming round this long sweeping right-hand bend, Emerald is right up there, and as they level out into the straight now, it's Marco Visconti, then comes Emerald, then Blah Blah making run, and Seabird coming there with a great run in the centre, and it's Seabird now has come to take it up. It's Seabird on the wing as they race into the straight up the final 2 furlongs. It's Seabird now being chased by Reliance. Seabird from Reliance, Carvin is not far behind him, then Diatome and Anilin. Seabird from Reliance in 2nd place, then comes Diatome, then Anilin, and Seabird swerving as he races up to the line, but he's being patted by Batlian, a great champion. Seabird's the winner, Reliance is 2nd.
There was a natural tendency at the time to claim this as the greatest performance ever seen, and Seabird as the greatest ever racehorse. That may be unrealistic, but Seabird's time form rating of 145 is unmatched by any other horse featured on this programme. In fact, no other horse comes within 4 pounds of him.
Those of us who were around in racing at that time knew that Seabird was something special from watching him in the Derby. That made him special, but the Arc showed that he was extra special. And what marked him out was his acceleration.
Seabird coming there with a great run in the centre, and it's Seabird now has come to take it up. It's Seabird on the wing as they race into
the Arc was the race, obviously, all-age race. that was the race where he ran against the world's best middle distance horses, and he completely pulverised them. He put himself, I think, in that category, the category of a horse like Hyperion or Rebo before him. They only come once every 50 years or so, and we've been looking for a Seabird ever since, I think. A lot of horses have been put up against him, but I would still say that he's definitely the best horse that I've ever seen.
Well ahead in second place is the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe that took place 21 years after Seabirds. It is, of course, the Arc of Dancing Brave, well remembered for the searing run of England's champion colt. Dancing Brave's career was highlighted by many notable triumphs, such as the Guineas, Eclipse and King George, but it was also punctuated by some failures, notably in the Breeders' Cup at Santa Anita and most memorably in the Derby, where his jockey Greville Starkey was heavily criticised for giving his mount too much to do in the home straight.
Dancing Brave is on the extreme left, starting to motor, but oh, so much to do! 1.5 he whips to do it, and Shahrastani goes for home, but here, powering down the centre of the track, is the red-hot favourite Dancing Brave inside the final furlong. Shahrastani from Dancing Brave! Dancing Brave closing with every stride! Shahrastani just hold on at the line. Shahrastani from Dancing Brave!
Revenge over Shahrastani came at Ascot, when patiently ridden by Pat Edery, deputising for an injured Starkey, Dancing Brave had held off a late challenge from Shadari.
And it's Pat Edery on Dancing Brave from Shadari. Triptych just moving into third as they race to the line. Dancing Brave avenges his Epsom defeat. Dancing Brave being challenged again by Shadari, but holding him well. Dancing Brave the winner, Shadari second, Triptych third.
Despite such a glittering season, Dancing Brave needed to win the Arc to establish himself as one of the great racehorses. And were he to win, his reputation would be all the greater because of the presence of the French champion and Derby winner Bearing, unbeaten in 4 races as a 3-year-old. It was a classic English-French confrontation. But this was no 2-horse contest. In fact, in Timeform's considered opinion, the Arc of 1986 was the strongest and most representative in many years.
And Dancing Brave really switched off by Pat Edery.
There was the dual Derby winner Shahrastani, the brilliant Vermeer winner Darara, older horses such as Triptych and Shadari, the German ace Akatanango, unbeaten in his last 12 outings, Coronation Cup winner Saint-Estèphe, French Leger winner Mersey, and Prix de Deauville winner Baby Turk. In a race that produced a record time, Pat Edery, who had kept the ride on Dancing Brave, was seen at his very finest.
But it's Baby Turk who leads, from the main in second, Akatanango in third, then up on the outside Diaston, Shadari going well, Darara behind that one, then comes Shahrastani, Bearing, and Pat Edery on Dancing Brave has Bearing in his sights. They've got just over 4.5 furlongs to go, and it's Baby Turk from the main, then behind these Diaston, Shahrastani with the white face on the outside of the pack, tracked by Bearing. Darara looks for room, and Dancing Brave, Pat Edery has him well in behind, as Nemain now, as they turn into the home straight, 3 furlongs to go, throws down the big challenge to Baby Turk. It's Baby Turk next to the rails, then comes Nemain, then Akatanango, then Shadari, followed by Shahrastani, then Bearing making well on the very wide outside, and Dancing Brave on the extreme right of the picture. Pat Edery asking for everything, a furlong and a half to go, and it's Shadari now who strikes the front. Darara with the noseband, Bearing on the very wide outside with a white face Shahrastani, but here comes Dancing Brave, powering down the centre of the track, and it's Dancing Brave now who's come to take up the running. Dancing Brave is going to go on, Dancing Brave is going to win at the post. Dancing Brave from Bearing, Shahrastani at Triptych, then Shadari and Darara.
He had huge acceleration, didn't he? I mean, he had grace, he had poise, he travelled very well, he caught the public's imagination. I think after the episode at Epsom as well, there'd been a lot of speculation around the horse. And to go to the Arc, to go into their backyard in what was an above standard Arc de Triomphe with Bearing. Triptych was only third, of course, and she was a champion filly. It was just an outstanding performance by the colt.
Bearing has come through, and I remember this huge roar that went up from the crowd, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, came Dancing Brave with Pat Edery, which just burst through and annihilated it, and it was the most unbelievable finish. So what I'd say to you, why it always sticks in my mind was the build-up to it, and in fact, there was no anticlimax. It was the most brilliant finish.
The finishing position of all the leading contenders suggested that the race had run to form, and yet Dancing Brave, with that dazzling burst on the outside, had swept past the others as if they were standing still. It sealed his reputation. No other horse received a vote in the Horse of the Year honours, but more importantly, it left an abiding memory. And so we've arrived at the number one, and along the way seen brilliance, doggedness, courage, scintillating speed, and had our emotions tugged this way and that. And the race voted number one is remembered as one of the greatest ever head-to-heads witnessed on the turf in Britain. The King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes of 1975, featuring Grundy and Bustino, is our greatest ever flat race. The classic winning 3-year-old of the year up against the previous year's St Leger winner, who'd won the Coronation Cup, his only start prior to Ascot.
In the lead from Grundy, and then comes Nobility.
Grundy was an unbeaten 2-year-old who'd been beaten in the English 2000 Guineas but redeemed himself in the Irish equivalent. Stamina doubts surrounded him as he prepared for the Derby, where his principal challenger, the brilliant Green Dancer, was considered more suited to the distance. In the event, Green Dancer ran no sort of a race, and Grundy won in great style.
It's Grundy streaking into the lead. It's Grundy and Pat Etery from King Pellinor.
Grundy soon confirmed his superiority over his contemporaries with victory in the Irish Derby.
Clear of King Pellinor, second, Hans Pretender third, and at the line, Grundy's the winner, King Pellinor second, Hans Pretender third.
A paddock filled with the cream of European bloodstock, and the pivot of this exceptional international field, Grundy, the Derby winner, the Irish Derby winner, and today seeking to become the highest stake earner ever trained in this country.
There were still questions about whether Grundy was a true mile-and-a-half horse, and Major Dick Hearn, Bustino's trainer, was determined to put that to the test by running no less than 2 pacemakers, one a miler and the other a stayer. Just for good measure, the field included Dahlia, winner of the 2 previous King Georges, and Star Appeal, winner of the Eclipse and future winner of the Arc.
And they're away. And Bustino himself is one of the first to show, from Grundy on the outside, and then Highest racing up now to take it up from Kinglet, and it's Highest from Kinglet and Bustino.
This was basically a head-to-head. The Bustino camp ran 2 pacemakers in a bid to draw the sting out of Grundy, and in the end it probably finished both horses, but it was something to watch, and you weren't quite sure for a long time which one was actually going to prevail.
Ribbon already, they're coming up towards the mile marker at a really blistering gallop still, with Highest going on from Kinglet and Star Appeal, then a gap of 3 lengths to Bustino, then comes Grundy. Behind Grundy is Ashmore with Dahlia, then Dibbydale and Card King, and On My Way and Libra's Ribbon. Only 7 furlongs to run now in the King George VI and Queen Elizabeth Diamond Stakes, and it's Highest in the lead from Kinglet, and then comes Star Appeal, and then Bustino. Behind Bustino is Grundy, then Ashmore, then Dahlia, then Card King, and then Dibbydale, then Libra's Ribbon. On My Way is the back marker of the 11 runners, and now it's Kinglet who's going on. Kinglet from Highest, and then Star Appeal, and then Bustino. Bustino making relentless progress. Back in 5th place is Grundy, but closing with them. And then comes Ashmore, and then Dahlia, and it's Kinglet from Star Appeal now as they race towards the 5 furlong marker and pass it. It's Kinglet in the lead from Star Appeal in 2nd, and Bustino 3rd, and Grundy 4, and 5 Ashmore, and 6 is Dahlia. 7 just behind them. Libra's Rib making good ground towards the outside. Then Card King. Behind Card King is Dibbydale, then On My Way, and they're past the half-mile marker now and racing towards the home turn, and it's Bustino has gone on from Grundy, and it's Bustino now in the lead from Grundy, the favourite, in 2nd. Then comes Star Appeal 3rd. Dahlia's coming there strongly 4. Behind Dahlia is Ashmore, then Libra's Ribbon, Card King as they level up for home, and Bustino from Grundy in 2nd. Star Appeal and Dahlia, then Ashmore, then On My Way beginning a run towards the stand side at the 2 furlong marker, and it's Bustino, Joe Mercer being pressed by Pat Etery now. Grundy, then Dahlia in 3rd place as they race towards the furlong pole. It's Bustino and Grundy together. Then comes Dahlia, then On My Way. Bustino on the far side, Grundy on the near side, the 3-year-old and the 4-year-old. They race into the final 150 yards, and it's Grundy going on from Bustino and Dahlia and On My Way. Bustino's fighting his way back, but Grundy's holding him, and as they come to the line, Grundy wins it. Bustino 2nd, Dahlia 3rd.
This is what it's all about. Both horses at the peak of their powers. One was the champion of 1 year and one was a star from another year. On that particular day, they were both on top form, and everything was right for a power struggle, and that's exactly what we got. and it was a tremendously gutsy effort by Grundy to wear the horse down in the end.
Pat Eddery on board Grundy thought Bastino had stolen a crucial lead when he went 4 lengths up, and even when passed, Bastino came back for more. To see 2 good horses draw clear of other good horses and not give an inch is what distinguishes this race, and the time supports its status. The course record was lowered by more than 2 seconds. Both horses had given absolutely everything, and undoubtedly that was true, for they were never the same again. Grundy disappointed next time out and was retired. Bastino never raced again. Perhaps his fighting spirit had been broken. Well, there we have it, and I hope you've enjoyed our selection of flat racing's 25 greatest ever races. You may dispute some of the placings, maybe even some of the selections, but it would be hard to disagree that they've all been sensational races, won by some of the most magnificent horses of the post-war era.